In America, a number of wealthy and influential parents of college applicants are accused of conspiring with a college consultant to cheat in college entrance exams and to bribe college officials. It's the biggest college admission scandal ever in U.S. history, with many appalled at how blatantly these rich families could cheat their children into prestigious colleges. The scam also puts a spotlight on other controversies in U.S. college admission system, such as legacy and donation preferences. What are the vulnerabilities of the system and how are they exploited? And how does this affect the perception of class and education throughout society? To discuss these issues more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Zhao Miao, partner at Angie Law Firm, and Harvey Zordin, senior fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. We'll also be joined via satellite by Professor Jean-Louis Mukeli at the University of Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne, who is the former General Director of Higher Education in France. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Harvey, prosecutors have charged a total of 50 people, including parents, college consultants, coaches, and administrators. What are the likely penalties for those who were found guilty in each row?
Well, the penalties have already begun because some very prestigious people have lost their jobs in terms of being managing partners of law firms, in terms of having a TV show or series that's canceled, but that's just the beginning. Later comes IRS, income tax evasion and fraud, and other fraud for conspiracy and other charges. And those are very serious, with incarceration for up to 20 years per count, plus fines upwards of several hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's very, very serious.
Penalties are quite severe. But Zhao Miao, from the perspective of common sense, how big is the tip of an iceberg? I mean, everybody says the hidden part of the iceberg would be much, much larger than that has been exposed by the recent revelations of the media.
Well, I would say it's appalling, actually, especially where several of the factors. One, the most prestigious university had been involved. That's, really shocking the conscience, actually. If you are talking about common or private schools, that's probably people are more tolerant. But then if you are talking about like top 5 universities, that's something less tolerable. And secondly, it's like a conspiracy involving different parties, different stakeholders, including like school team coaches and also intermediaries and parents, and also some of the workers working for the test centers. So that actually just revealed maybe a very small portion of the really large iceberg. So that's why it's very alarming, I would say.
Okay, let me cross over to Jean-Louis Mukeli. Let's have some thoughts on the French side or in continental Europe. Jean, do you have similar situations in Europe or European universities?
No, I don't think so, because you need less tuition to go in the universities, especially in France. It's quite free, so it's no matter to have a conspiracy and so things like that to enter. And so we have a double system with business school and engineer school, where you have high tuition, but we have national examination, so it's very difficult to have bribery.
What are the official policies towards donations? Jean?
The efficient policy for the selection, I think that the efficient policy is to establish a sort of independent agency who has the control of all the examinations, and it will be better to do that than to do examination college by college,
And what do you think of the legacy students, meaning previous family members of the students that have been accepted by the prestigious university? were also enrolled by the same university, and therefore this is the family tradition to have students educated in the same prestigious university. We call this legacy student. What do you think of this phenomenon in Europe, Jean?
Yes, you know, in Europe we haven't that sort of a tyranny of ranking. The problem is United States, it's a tyranny of ranking. So to have kids in a very prestigious university is a sort of a package for the success story of the family. So in order to avoid that, we have not so tyranny of ranking in Europe. So never mind if your kids do a study in one university or in another one.
Harvey, what's your understanding about the alleged tyranny of ranking in Europe?
My understanding is that in the professor's country, France, they have the opposite problem, because in most fields, anybody who wants to have a university education can have it, and have it for free. So you have a situation in some universities in France where you might have a classroom for 300 people but have 1,000 students enrolled in the class. So it may be more egalitarian, but that egalitarianism carries with it its own problems.
But this obviously goes against the elite education system of the United Kingdom. Having said this, Zhao Miao, is it a common practice for parents in Asia to make donations so that their children could be enrolled in universities such as Harvard, Princeton, those of the Ivy League?
In the past, in history, we don't have that history or tradition. But nowadays, based on my knowledge, the Chinese parents started to get used to making donations to those prestigious universities, and also that started actually from like Hong Kong and Singapore. You know, those two countries are more like, you know, colonial kind of society there. They kind of inherited some of the Western practices, including this legacy student thing and also the donation system. So I believe now the elite families, for Chinese or Asian families, they're trying to adjusting the donation system, you know, adopted in the U.S. education, higher education system.
Harvey, what does the American law say about legacy or donations?
There's a continuum here from people who get by or get admitted just by their brilliance or their qualifications to people who game the system by illegally bribing officials and things. There's a gray area in the middle. It's a big gray area. So things like legacies are permitted. Things like giving preference to the children of faculty of important universities is permitted. People who give a lot of money are welcomed and get the tax deductions for that. Those are acceptable. That's legal. But what these people did, these 50 who are charged, is illegal because they bribed people, they engaged in other nefarious activities. And what I actually find very interesting is, of the 50 people who were charged, only one had a Chinese name. And I believe this is because Chinese parents are such tiger moms and pops and push their children so hard that they don't have to engage in this. And it's also interesting because so many Asian students now have such good scores and such good grades that they're in a way discriminated against because the universities try to find a diversity. And a lot of those Chinese students and Asian students get left out because they've done so well. As President Carter once said, life is unfair.
Taking Elaine Chao, Secretary of Transportation, as an example, her family and family education could be a case in point. 5 daughters of her father were enrolled in Harvard, and she married the party whip of the Republicans, by the way, very powerful politician in the D.C. Having said this, Zhao Miao, you're a lawyer. What do you think of the possibility for some of those who were charged to fight the charges, and what's the chance for them to survive the lawsuit?
Well, It looks like they probably need to plead guilty and find a compromised way, pay their fines, and then maybe get a reduction of the actual jail time. That's actually what I would say, wearing my lawyer's hat. On the other side, wearing my common citizen kind of hat, I would say this kind of phenomenon, it really hurts the confidence as, we being little pieces of the society and also being the, one of the population, one of the members of the society. This actually undermines all the fairness and democracy, all those values America has been promoted so far. So I believe Harvey and me, we were discussing some of the students, some of the kids, they, on the one side, they could be victims of their mom's or parents' wrongdoing, but on the other side, they were depriving other students possibility and opportunity to actually get into those schools. So still, in that sense, they need to be punished, and paying their price for this. So I don't have sympathy, I would say.
Jean, let me cross over to Jean-Louis. What's your thought on, what are your thoughts on, say, the size of Asian students in European universities? Do you think these students are very, very brilliant because they are very hardworking, or do you think there is a strong background of donations? What do you think of, say, the growing presence of Asian students?
So now in France, by example, the Chinese students they are the first group of foreign students in France. And we have all the sort of Chinese students, very good, very nice, and the other one not very good. So it depends of where they come from and what they have done before in their own colleges. So it's very, very different from United States organization.
Are there big differences between education of higher learning in France and the United Kingdom, which has been known for centuries, producing elite students who later on became prime ministers in number 10 of Downing Street? Jean?
Yes, it's very different because in United Kingdom you have a lot of private university with high tuitions, and in France we have a lot of public university with very low tuition fees. So the incentives and the flows are very different.
There has been a widespread political undermining, Harvey, of oversight and regulation in many areas of American life, such as businesses, the environment, drug testing and approval, to name a few. To what extent is this scandal a further example of this phenomenon?
Well, we have this constant debate in the United States of America about market forces versus regulation, and it's always a changing seesaw. But I would say that's mostly about economics and about the regulation of business, like, let's say, regulation of monopolies. But in this case, I think it's a situation where people have become entitled and drunk with entitlement, drunk with being rich, and therefore feeling entitled. It's kind of like in the professor's country, a king once said, "The state, it's me." So those people feel, we can do anything. And I think you have a saying in China that a fish rots from the head. And so if you look at the situation, I think this rotting is coming from somebody like Donald Trump, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and who thinks that the law applies to everybody else but not to him. And so I believe that these people have a false sense of entitlement, and it does not make our country or our values look very good.
John, are you confident that integrity of American university admissions could be maintained in the aftermath of this scandal, the biggest of its kind in the U.S. history?
I would still say yes. basically from its political system, it always have this check and balance system. You know, this biggest scandal, although it is biggest and it is appalling, but it has its opportunity to get exposed and get scrutinized by, you know, all the prosecutors, mass media. They will pay their price and pay the cost and get penalized. So every time we would say this kind of exposure or explosion actually provide a pretty good opportunity to redefine the system and to improve the system. But overall, I would still say it has a good foundation. But actually, I do have a very curious question. Like, are those parents worried about their kids fail at school, even if they try to, you know, send their kids to those prestigious universities?
You think the competitions, once they were admitted, it would be very, very tough for students who went into the universities with the lower grades. You are watching Dialogue with Zhao Miao, Harvey Zoding, and Jean-Louis Mukherjee. We are discussing why the United States has had this biggest scandal in college entrance admissions. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Harvey, FBI allegations say that the conspiracy started in 2011, but authorities only became aware of the scheme in April 2018. Who should be responsible for the oversight, and what mechanisms are needed to prevent such crimes in the future?
Well, the reason that it took so long to uncover this scandal is that the FBI only learned about it in 2018. They were working on another case, and the person who was involved in that unrelated case had information about this activity and hoped that he would get off more lightly if he cooperated with the FBI, which he did. So that's why it took so long. I believe, similar to what Echo said, that this scandal is a wake-up call and will force institutions to be more rigorous, to establish various internal procedures and so on, so that this doesn't happen again. I believe that it is much more widespread than we've learned, and that it needs to be addressed. But I think that this situation has made a big difference. So I think going forward in the future, the institutions will be much more careful.
Yes, indeed, this is a big wake-up call for American educators and administrators, college consultants as well. Let me go back to Jean-Louis Mukherjee. Hello, Jean.
Yes.
When you were Director General of the ministry in your country, did you have any major scandals? And if there were, what kind of lessons or experiences could we draw in China and in the United States?
Yes, sometimes we have some scandal because, you know, corruption can be everywhere, but they have been very limited. We have had one scandal maybe 5 years ago as a forced diploma. Forced diploma have been given to foreign students, and now the director of this institution is in jail and he has been condemned. So we haven't no so high scandals than we see this one in the United States now.
Zhao Miao, well, let's look at the exaggeration of testing scores. It seems to be a typical case of forgery or deception. So what do you think of this similar scandal that we heard from Jean-Louis Mukherjee? Is it very common to have this kind of fakes?
I think, you know, the scandal in France is kind of different. That's production of face certificate or diploma. On our side, I think this time one of the little scenario there is they cheated on the ACT or you know, kind of the college entrance exam thing. That's a little bit. Previously, we always thought United States, you look at comprehensive standard when you decide which student to take in, but now it looks like they are also paying attention to the scoring, and they actually undermine that process about, you know, everyone coming. We normally thought exams, at some extent, it's probably the most fair thing. You know, everyone come at the same time looking at the same set of examining papers. But then if you are able to undermine that process, that's something very strange. Why they would pay attention to that little perspective if the overall admission criteria is so comprehensive? But they do also play into all the other comprehensive factors when you try to decide which student to take in. But that's, from an Asian mom's perspective, that's kind of one of my observation. Well, I don't know which way is more proper, like testing only or the comprehensive way. The comprehensive way that allows more objectivity, or subjectivity, I would say. Who's reviewing or who's the admission officer, they have a much more room to actually decide. And that will actually allow more freedom to decide, actually. Discretionary power actually allow more space or possibility for corruption. That's my comments.
Testing scores could be very important yardstick to examine the brilliance and excellency of students' academic performance. But what do you think of the case of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates as well as Zuckerberg? Are they Class A students or they only achieved a lot from the examination?
Well, I think there are some people who are so brilliant that they achieve greatness because they are studying in the university of the streets. They are studying from life. And so sometimes knowledge even is an encumbrance. And so I believe that you don't need to go to Harvard or any school for that matter to be brilliant, although in most people's cases it does help. But getting back to the question about the subjective and objective, I wanted to talk a little bit about our testing system versus your Chinese testing system about the Gaokao. I don't like the Gaokao. I'm glad I didn't have to do it. I think that it measures people's ability to memorize large amounts of information and vomit it back. Take one example, English. English is a skill that's tested on the Gaokao, but most Chinese people I know of who are in their 20s, let's say, who've gone through the Gaokao, they don't speak English. They memorize this for the exam, and that's it. I think an exam needs to measure more than just how you can memorize things. It has to help you to be a critical thinker, to be inventive. China is taking its place in the world now as the #1 country, and it needs to develop many aspects of its society. One of them is being worked on is making production and industrial design and so on better. Another one is to assume a leadership in artificial intelligence. I don't think a test like the Gaokao does it. It will not pick out those people. It won't even pick out the Zuckerbergs, I don't think, and the Steve Jobs.
Jean, have you heard of China's Gaokao, or National Entrance Examination for the college and universities? Harvey has been pretty critical of this. And by the way, Jean, if you can, we want to learn more about the integrity of your student enrollment programs. How do you rate the capabilities and academic excellency of students?
Yes, I've heard about Gaokao. We have something looking like that in France. So first, before the entrance at the university, we have to pass a national examination, and that's the entrance ticket for the university. But you have to know that at the university we have not a lot of selection. That's also a weakness for us, because students can go everywhere where they want in all the courses they want to choose, but they fail a lot, less than 40% of our students that get the final degree after 4 years in the university. So that's a strong weakness of our system.
Harvey, what do you think of, say, the tradition you have borrowed from across the Atlantic? Americans are descendants of Europeans, and do you think you have, based on the tradition of the UK, developed something of your own, and you have been very proud of the American dream that the university education could afford to descendants of immigration?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a descendant of immigration, so I believe that I had opportunities that my parents did not have, and I believe that our system tries to do the impossible, and that is to have a balanced student population of different kinds of people, rich and poor, geographically diverse, different religions, different backgrounds, and so on. It's an impossible task, but I think it represents the diversity of America. And I believe, except for these 50 people and the people who are as yet undiscovered, that the system works fairly well. It always could be improved, and as a result of this scandal, it will be.
Let me go back to the issue of a legacy. The Bush family seems to be the most famous brand for legacy issues. The Bush family delivered 2 presidents of the United States, and the young Bush Jr. is said not to be so brilliant, at least as brilliant as his father, and yet he graduated from Yale. Do you think this has a lot to do with the very wealthy family background of doing all your business, Harvey?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that one of the things that this makes the system imperfect, but maybe necessarily so, is that elites perpetuate themselves because they are the ones who give a lot of money to the universities, whether they want to get people admitted or not. It's part of their noblesse oblige, their obligation that they feel. So yes, maybe George W. Bush could get in and some deserving person did not, in the same way that Jared Kushner got into Harvard, or that Donald Trump got into University of Pennsylvania and robbed others of the chance. But like I said before, life is unfair. The universities need money so that they can give full scholarships to students who are poor. On the other hand, Harvard's endowment is $37.1 billion. That's more than the annual GDP of half the countries in the world. Harvard uses that money for professors, for scholarships and things, but it seems to me to be a little excessive.
Well, to conclude our discussion here, Harvey, what do you think of the impact of the scandal? Is it a wake-up call for Asian students, or rather the wealthy families like those in Hollywood, in the DC, in Wall Street, who should wake up to the lessons and suspend this malpractice?
It's a wake-up call for all the stakeholders, actually. There's a lawsuit going on now at Harvard that's about to be decided, in which some people argue that Asians are discriminated against because they're held to a higher standard, or they're judged to be socially inept. And so there was a lot of testimony about this in the lawsuit. I believe that the scandal is shedding light on the situation, and that the universities, to preserve their reputation, some of them like Harvard, earned over a period of hundreds of years, need to do more to protect their legacy.
Tom Yao, Harvard was accused of discriminating against Asian American applicants. At many U.S. colleges, Asian American applicants are accepted at lower rates than others with the same grades and test scores. Have you heard of this kind of accusations about Harvard's policies?
I didn't hear anything about Harvard policy, but it's pretty bad or serious in California. That's another state where, you know, Asian American or Chinese actually immigrate to and concentrate. And it seems that the selection process has been very, very competitive, and also they have been actually improve or elevate the standard to admitting Asian students.
Thank you so much. That's the end of the story. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.